Okay, nice
Thank you.
to meet you, and to this fourth session for virtual session entitled Socio-Political Issues for Community Psychology. And it's a great pleasure to be with you. And just a few information for who is connecting right now only. We are going to try to have 10 minutes presentations in order to have the possibility, hopefully, to have 5 minutes for some discussion at the end of the contributions, of each contributions. I will try to support you by the chat, signaling the time, the remaining time for your intervention. Of course, feel free to stop before or after. A few minutes can be tolerated, especially in this symposium, because the presentation are going to be 5, with a video contribution from a colleague from DePaul University from US. And if you, and please try to use the chat also to collect some questions even during the talks. This could allow me to summarize them for the speaker at the end of the intervention, but of course feel free also to unmute your channel and to make possibly the questions with your real voice. And the first talk, sorry, because it's the third symposium from 1 p.m. for me, so I'm a little bit confused. My name is Andrea Guazzini, and I'm a researcher in community psychology from University of Florence. So again, it's a pleasure to meet you here and to see you all. And the first contribution should be from Nancy, that I can perfectly see. Hi, Nancy. And that's from the Chicago School of Professional Psychology from US. And she's going to present a talk entitled When the Government is the Enemy, Strategies for Communities to Heal from Human Rights Abuses. And if you want, Nancy, you can try to share your screen. And when you're ready, you can start. Okay, we can see it perfectly. Yes.
Great. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, yes, perfectly. Thank you again, Nancy.
Loud and clear.
Excellent. Hi, everybody. Greetings from Chicago. You know, these international conferences can be confusing. So this morning, as I was getting up, I checked to make sure I knew what time it was in Naples. So I Googled it. It said it was 9:13, and I was, oh my gosh, I'm late. And then, you know, at some point the coffee kicked in and I realized that's Naples, Florida. And I wasn't late. So I really appreciate that that I was able to prepare in a timely way. What I want to talk to you today is about how I prepared for a research project that I want to embark on. And the research project is essentially really trying to explore aspects of how communities recover or heal or repair themselves or reconcile after the government has engaged in torture and trauma. So I've become familiar with 3 areas. You can see in the photographs up here on the left, this is a picture of South African police who were used to enforce apartheid-era policies. And in this picture are beating up on children, and they killed hundreds of children who were protesting, Black children, having to learn Afrikaans in school. The photograph on the right is a picture of the Chicago police. And the Chicago police has a long practice that continues of torturing people of color. And at least 176 of African-American men were documented as being tortured by a special prosecutor. And the photograph in the middle is a picture from Paine, Chile, which is of 1,000 trees minus 70, the 70 men who were disappeared during the Pinochet regime because they were trying to organize a labor collective. So what happens when the government engages in these kinds of activities? What happens is that individuals become fractured, but so do families and communities. Social networks disintegrate, victims are not believed, the state tries to hide its action, and the ability of family members, neighbors, and the state to provide or encourage trusting relationships among people is eviscerated. Now, what I'm going to share with you is the work that I've been doing to prepare for interviewing survivors of apartheid in South Africa. I've been to South Africa a couple of times. I wanted to do an environmental scan of the South African context of understanding how healing or reparation might occur. And I was particularly interested in people from the arts. So while I was there, it was a very short trip. It was immediately when I could travel, because there were restrictions. So I met with over 20 activists, educators, and artists, and then had just conversations throughout, as I encountered people. And often many of the people I had appointments with brought others in. And I really just wanted to talk to them about how they use the arts themselves or education or their activism to promote reconciliation of whatever community they were working with. And I also met repeatedly with Kulumani staff and members who I've been working with over the past 2 years. So, the literature that I looked at was hard to find. So I ended up trying to go through community healing literature and identified what I think of as process and what I think of as outcomes. Now, what was important about the process, and I'm not going to read all of this, but what's important about the process is that to acknowledge that people have different goals in a reconciliation process. And victims typically want repair, they want reparations. But perpetrators are seeking a moral recovery. They are seeking the opportunity to recover character and standing within a community. For outcomes, what I've heard over and over from Chileans who experienced Pinochet, from South Africans, from people in Chicago who were tortured by the police, they want truth, they want a record of what happened. They want recognition of suffering, they want the government to acknowledge that suffering. But they also want to reclaim community and empowered community, and they want their basic human rights met. So then I started going in and talking to these folks. And again, like I said, this is trying to do an environmental scan for me to understand people I'm about to interview more particularly. And as I met with artists, they said, what the arts enable the most is a creative process for understanding other people's experience. The arts are not necessarily an official platform. So people may be able to speak more freely. They may be able to imagine if it's a visual art, they may be able to imagine what the artist meant and then how they experience it and find space between that. It's they can also, through the arts, engage through performing arts, like say a drumming circle. You end up, working together in order to create at least a bond. And these are tools that artists use to try to work with people in the township, as well as white South Africa, that is of the age when apartheid was being enforced. I talked to educators as well, and the educators really talked about the need to explore multiple truths, that in order to understand those multiple truths, maybe there are new concepts of citizenship that can be taught. And the concepts of citizenship should be that there's not one hegemonic national citizenship that everybody should have, but people can have a cultural citizenship. They can have a community or township citizenship. They can have multiple forms of citizenship, and then start to understand their responsibilities to others through that civic education. There's a lot of postmodern thinking that's going into the texts that are being created for school children, that recites what is learned, that recites what has happened to the other in South Africa, but also how it's understood. And there's a dialogue that goes back and forth between these. There's also quite a bit of information about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa, but they don't document that much about apartheid, about what the actual human rights violations that the government committed were. I also met with activists, and the activists were activists perhaps during apartheid South Africa, but they are also active now. And typically what they want is they want their human rights. In this picture, I have a photograph of a grave from people from Sharpeville, because the activists that I spoke to were very much aware that there were risks that they took in order as activists, and that continues. Ma Palani is up here in the photograph in the middle. She was a survivor of the Sharpeville massacre, where 167 residents were killed when they were engaged in civil disobedience. And then this picture of the shadow is the shadow of Paul Rhodes. So the activists at University of Cape Town were able to tear down the statue of Paul Rhodes, but his shadow remains. There's no question what human rights are. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights has pretty much established what they are, and they are incorporated in the South African Constitution. I got reflections. I feel like I'm galloping through this presentation, but I hope you're with me. I got reflections from South Africans who were really wanted to tell me different things about how they see themselves. There are many threads to the South African story. There are 11 official languages, and rural and urban exiles and those who stayed. The legacy of apartheid is there. There is no one history. But every person I talked to felt that the government was corrupt, failing in their duty to help them heal, and that it was up to them to create that progress. So I'm just concluding with this picture from the Freedom Museum to provide an idea of, these are all textiles. And they were created to represent all of the multiple tribes and people and roots of people, ethnicities of people in South Africa. And there are pictures of South Africans that change on these TV screens. And that representativeness was really important for the people to come together, and in coming together to move forward concepts of freedom.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you, and sorry. I ate really to this role to say 5 minutes, 3 minutes, 1 minute. So actually, yeah, it's there's probably a world, a universe behind and beyond your work. I can suppose it, but it's clear. So very, very thank you. And of course, I would like from the colleagues some insights or some inspiring questions, because I think that, you know, in 2 days we are going to have elections in Italy. And also, so I would say good luck to Italians, because actually, you know, also our politicians in this really hard period for Europe and for the world. Unfortunately, we have also a war in Europe, but we know that there's a lot of wars around the world and different kind of conflicts. So frequently, that's my point of view, of course, also promoted or at least sustained by people, not just by governments, of course. When the governments are the enemy, are the enemies, everything is more complicated. And I think, yeah, from a point of view, at least in Italy, community psychology should play a role in the past. And sometime, that's my feeling, we missed to make the difference, at least. But usually during this symposia, the insights are so many that it's difficult to go beyond what jumps in the mind, or at least of the chairman. And so I want really to give you the opportunity to maybe enlarge your talk with this inspiration that I got from your talk. What about the usage of narratives and counter narratives methods in order to you know, I was really in line with the fact that in South Africa there are 11 and more languages, different cultures, different peoples together, that probably beyond the different cultures they represent have also some difficulties to interact, because different narratives or different ways to understand and explain the reality. Do you think that this could be a tool, that this tool could be useful to promote a bottom-up process that could change something, or do you have other ideas?
Yeah, really, a lot of the people I talked to, particularly the artists, talked about the idea of there being narratives and counter narratives. Like the performing artists I talked to said that it was said, look, the people in the township can't afford our performances, so we perform there for free. We reflect back to them their stories. In the more affluent communities, they also perform the stories of people in the township, but they get paid for it. So they're really trying to build an understanding of the narrative, and both audiences are appreciative. The other example that comes to my mind was at the Freedom Museum, and they had a short video. It was maybe 1 to 2 minutes, but it was a video where you start to see the Dutch settlers coming into Cape Town, and it's from the point of view of people on the land, and they're viewing these ships entering their where they're at. And then they have the point of view from the ship. They're looking at the land and they're seeing these indigenous peoples of South Africa. And it just goes around in a loop. And that really is deliberate, so that, which the whole design of the Freedom Museum is, which is to understand that universal desire for freedom, both from the people who were on the land and those who came to South Africa.
Yeah, definitely, yes, very interesting. Very interesting, and as I told before, there are universe of challenges and insights from this kind of approach. We have Maria Eugenia that suggested do the artists work from the theater of the present perspective?
They do. They may not call it that, but that's absolutely what they do. You know, they are at the theater for the less good idea. You know, I think the name actually helps us understand. And actually in the PowerPoint, I put in a link. So for those of you who want to look at their website, please feel free. Yeah, they're very much about raising the voices of people in the townships. And they work with those folks too. They have some interesting exercises. I'm going to do a class there, a study abroad class there, and I'm going to have them train my students in how to empathize with people who live in the township. I don't want my students to have sympathy. I want them to understand the story, you know, so.
Yeah, actually, I agree with Maria. I took place in present theater with the present theater method experience some years ago in ex-Yugoslavia, you know, in Serbia. Actually, just after the war, and still now, unfortunately for the Russian crazy war, Serbia and Croatia are separating, are renewing their conflicts. So actually, yeah, unfortunately, as I told before, all over the world we have new conflicts, but also cultural icebergs, I would say, that are rebuilding themselves. Anyway, yeah, please, Nancy, please.
It's why it's important to include all perspectives in that public space, because otherwise the suppression of you know, other people's narratives pops up in conflict.
Yeah, I agree totally. And unfortunately, it's a very up-to-date issue. Okay, thank you, Nancy. Maybe we can be back on these topics with the next, also with the next presentation, but possibly at the end of the session. The next speaker is Aurelio, that I can see there.
Here I am.
Aurelio.
Hello.
That is from the Dipartimento di Scienze dell'Educazione Giovanni Maria Bertin at the University of Bologna. So it's really near to us in Florence. So we are quite near. And that is
neighbor.
Neighbor. To present a talk entitled Queer Communities for Unicorns, Bisexual and Pansexual Experiences within Italian LGBTQIA+ communities. Thank you, Aurelio. I can see perfectly the presentation. Again, you have more or less 10 minutes, and when you want, you can start.
Thank you, Andrea, and thanks everyone for joining us together. And I'll say that it's a really happy day today, because in just a few minutes I'll explain what are bisexual and pansexual issues, and today is actually a very special day for us. So today Canva just decided to not work properly, so just bear with me for for the while of the presentation. So I'm a social psychologist from the University of Bologna, where I work on social sciences, masculinities, and sexual orientation study. And together with Professor Paola Villano, we are both social psychologists. We work on how the construction of communities and reduction of prejudice towards minority groups with different positioning, but also different lines of research. And on my part, I spent the last 7 years working on sexual orientation and bisexualities in Italy, both during my PhD and after that, try to understand how those who have attraction outside the binary of heterosexuality and homosexuality construct their identities, their communities, and their social relations. So what to bring home from today? I'll just have a brief point on why bisexualities are not actually studied so much, or they are erased within mainstream discourses, and a few key issues about bisexual communities. And also talking about what some research data we have. So bisexual politics are not so often discussed about in Italy. We have few and just regional association more than national ones within the more LGBTQIA+, so the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, intersexual, asexual, and plus all the other identities, which consist of the people who do not fit to the norm of being heterosexual and cisgender, so people who remain on the gender assigned at birth. So all the people who are kind of outside the norm of gender and sexual orientation and sex, or intersexual people. Italy is a specific context in which, thanks to kind of Catholic and Christianity hegemony, we have a lot of demonization of gender studies, and it's really hard to be a researcher on sexuality in this country, because there is a lot of pressure to not talk about your topics, and it's really difficult to do educational inside schools, because there is some conspiracy theories and enforced by right-wing political parties and by the Catholic Church about creative gender ideology, which was actually more spread also around in France. And it's actually pretty one of the mainstream topic of both the right-wing parties, Lega and Fratelli d'Italia. So the far right in Italy spends a lot of time to force sexual and gender researcher outside of academia, outside of school, outside of wherever they're working. So it's pretty difficult also to be both a researcher and activist, as I am. So there's also a lack of a national bi+ association in Italy. We have some main association for gay and lesbians, or for transgender people, and also for asexual, but bisexual people have been divided by other association and other political identities within the Italian context, by saying that bisexual people do not exist, that bisexual people have the same issues and needs of gay and lesbian people, which is actually far from true. And that led over the years from the 70s to not talk and force bisexual activists to identify themselves as gay or lesbian, which deprived us from kind of historical figure of bisexual activism in Italy. But why bisexuals? Because historically sexual orientation has been conceptualized from a dichotomous perspective, where only two sexualities were available, one which is normative, heterosexual, and one which is considered deviant still. And we have also in psychology and in social and community psychology, mostly the idea that sexual orientation is something that develops within puberty and then stays crystallized and rigid throughout our whole lives. But that's actually a theory and models which are not sustained by recent research, which states that different people come to different sexual orientation from different paths, and actually sexuality is not as rigid as we think to be. There's a lot of ways to flexibility and changes over time to happen in our identities and desires, which may lead some people to identify and have bisexual attraction over the course of their lives. So what is sexual orientation? You might say it's defined as a consistent and enduring pattern of desire for individuals of the same gender, another gender, or more than one, regardless of what we do, and it can manifest in actual behavior, which leads to a more broad definition of sexual orientation, whereas bisexual people are often erased because we, in a typical couple, we just see people of two genders, maybe the same gender or the other, of different genders, and then we presume, oh, okay, so they are heterosexual because they are a man and a woman, or they are gay or lesbians because they are two men or two women, where actually they could have totally different sexual orientation from which we expect. They might have a mixed orientation couple, one person is bisexual and the other is gay, lesbian, or straight. Or could actually be that that relationship is fully made of bisexual or pansexual people, which does, it might appear from like a typical heterosexual relationship with no issues of coming out, with no problems of erasure or biphobia, but actually there's more on the inside, and their differences are totally different regarding other, or regarding in comparison to straight couples. So bisexualities tend to mix and make sexuality studies more difficult, but also more efficient and more accurate in what kind of expression and identities we might have. And sexual orientation, it's a multidimensional than just following one way. Going back to the communities, why there's so much biphobia and so kind of investment. There's many bisexual scholars who say that both gay and lesbian and heterosexual people invest a lot of time and resources to say that bisexuality doesn't exist, because it blurs the lines and the borders of sexuality between normalcy and deviancy. So there's a lot of investment in both communities, which at the same time express their prejudice and stereotypes and erasure of bisexual identities, even within LGBTQ+ spaces. So we're not safe kind of everywhere. That led bisexual people to search refuge in other communities where, since they were not accepted most of the time if they fully express their bisexual identities in gay or lesbian bars and in the larger heterosexual world. So we created spaces of acceptance and where we could find some place to be, like the BDSM or kinky communities, or some gamer and nerd communities, or in the polyamorous and non-monogamous communities, where you can find a lot of bisexual and pansexual people in all of these three. Since we were not made feel at home in the whole general gay and lesbian movement, so we tried to build our own communities or to corrupt others. So why it was important also today it's the 23rd of September, which is Visibility Day, and it's the day of pride and visibility for bisexual people. And what we try to do in our job is to understand how bisexual people construct their identities and narratives within their life stories, and how they negotiate the narratives with relevant communities. So we interviewed over the last years a lot of bisexual people of different gender expression, both men, well, also men, women, and non-binary bisexual. Some of them were also trans people, and mostly were not religious or following a kind of personal spirituality, and with a kind of we also inquired some kind of economic background and class status, because there's the conviction that most bisexual have like a degree or they have higher education than other sexual orientation, which is not so far from truth. So the idea that the more you know about sexuality, the more actually you get to know that bisexuality exists. And we start to understand how they negotiate their relationship and identities with relevant social actors. We found out, as literature said, that bisexual people find themselves do multiple coming outs. Maybe they first identified as gay instead of heterosexual, and then they have to come out again to relevant partners, maybe facing biphobia because their gay or lesbian partners does not accept bisexuals. There's a lack of LGBT support and psychological support, even in psychological studies and psychotherapy, because since Freud, we believe that bisexual are incomplete people which have to achieve a complete gay or lesbian identity. So we treat bisexual people as a problem, as an incomplete, going through a phase, liars, cheaters, or just, in Italiano, we will say kind of parculos or opportunistic. And that which leads us to not inquire how they face a specific prejudice. Yeah, sorry for the slipping of Italian in it. So we do not inquire the biphobia in LGBT spaces, which is totally different from homophobia, because we are erased, and we have some stereotypes because we are attracted to multiple genders. And I use the we as I part of the community. And of course, we have to reassure our partners that we're not going to betray them with people of all different genders, because we expect bisexual people to be promiscuous and to go around cheating on everyone. So there's a lot of discourses within communities to reinforce identities and reclaim a positive bisexual identity by saying that I'm still bisexual, regardless of the gender of my partner. And I try to, and we also have to remind people that we are still bisexual, something that gay people don't have to do and lesbian people don't have to do. Heterosexual are assumed just to be the norm, so they're not on the mixer. Going really fast. So building bisexual experiences and finding them means to understand how our society and psychological process are built in a binary of gender and sexuality. We assume to be one or the other. There's no middle, there's no other ground. Bisexuality is not just a third option, there's many options out there. So the point is try to understand how can you fit in a world that is not created for you, and when you are put on the border, pushed all the time to choose one of the two words, and then you have to build your identity and on that, try to negotiate that actually there's not just two words, there's many words, and how can you build your even self and your community when others just trying to force you. So we found that actually bisexual people have and can find communities to find strategies to do some selective coming outs and to build a positive identity by reinforcing and clashing with heterosexual, gay and lesbian communities and peers, which leads them often to face isolation and to avoid going to association because they expect to receive prejudice because they are bisexual. Though the point is that we have to understand as psychologists how and what kind of binaries are within our theoretical framework and what we have done to not see the intersections of different kinds of binaries between gender, sexual orientation, color, ability, and class and everything else, because there's many identities on the margin. Bisexuality is just one of them that intersects with many others. And we live in a kind of community that forces people to choose only one of these. And then you have to choose, because if you don't, you will have to face more prejudice and oppression by two groups, which happen to bisexual, where they are pressured to be straight in the public or be gay or lesbian in their private life to avoid different kind of expectation, which also intersects with religious and national communities. If you are a migrant, like in this case for this participant, in which you have to also be a good migrant, or you get fetishized. Sorry, I will never be good at pronouncing that word. You face fetishization because you are a bisexual person of color. So what can we do? So we have to understand what are our binary models and what theories can actually help us to deconstruct these models of sexuality and communities. And what bisexual activists and groups are doing in Italy is trying to radicalize and reclaim their sexual orientation, not only just as valid and visible, but to be able to change our ways in which we view LGBT communities and gender. So the point is that if bisexuality is not real, our society will not spend so much time trying to prove that it doesn't exist. It will just fade away. Whereas since bisexuality blurs the border between deviancy and normalcy, so between heterosexual and queerness, that's why they try to erase us, to avoid this kind of bridge and connection. So we try to reclaim our orientation, not to be made invisible, but we also have to fight constantly against the binary world, which is pretty hard. So I invite you to actually get to know more about these kind of issues. And sorry for we could say marchetta, but if you want to know more, we are hosting an international research conference tomorrow with a lot of bisexual activists and researchers. So thank you for your attention. Anytime for a coffee, or if you have any question.
Thank you, Aurelio. Actually, as Italian, I appreciated a lot this presentation, and unfortunately, I think that these are very up-to-date issues for us. I think also all over the world. My question would be, but if you agree, I would continue with the presentation because we are.
Sorry, didn't read the messages.
No, don't worry. It was really interesting. And of course, actually, I will grab your email because I work with some LGBTQ plus association in Florence, and we discussed and discussing a lot about internalized homonegativity. So my question would be: there is, do you know this kind of issue also for bisexual specifically or not? And you know, as the self-stigma, actually it's a component, but the other component, we have the elections in today, so we all are scared, at least. But the polarization, political polarization around also this kind of topics, for my point of view, is the real not moral thing in Italy, because this is an issue, the fact that gender identity, orientation, or whatever are used as concept in political communication. And I think that this is a part of the problem, because, you know, we are talking about rights, and the rights should be not in the middle of this kind of propaganda activity, while we have, but as Italians, we know our condition. Just a brief consideration about this, if you can.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Andrea. Yes, there's a lot of internalized biphobia, which can be internalized, and we have a kind of imposter syndrome, which we think we are faking it. We're not real, because if everyone can choose just one gender to be attracted, then how can we? Because that's what everyone says. So we have also to deconstruct that and face the similar way of accepting our identities and our attraction. And you're right, like every other right-wing party can assimilate homosexual and gay. Actually, there's a bisexual candidate for Fratelli d'Italia, which is kind of absurd. Yeah, but yeah, we also can be assimilated, so we're not intrinsically revolutionary. And I really loved about what Nancy said about, you know, presentation, because we also want reparation for the historic erasure of bisexualities in Italian politics and movements, but it's not something they will easily give us to us. So also thank you, Nancy, for bringing the topic of reparation, because it's something what we want. We have been damaged by our own community, and they kind of refuse to acknowledge that. So we're kind of frustrating, but I'll be brief. So thank you, Andrea. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Aurelio. Thank you too. Unfortunately, when the talks are interesting, quite always here, it's even more difficult to reduce the time. But of course, this is just a way to keep in touch each other and maybe to continue these very nice and inspiring conversations later. Now we are going to
wait, Andrea. I also really would like to continue, and perhaps we could think about a comparative study with Israel.
Yeah,
like a new little research.
Let's keep in touch.
Yes, yes, definitely. The chat, actually, it's a way you can write to me if you want to be put in contact with each other. I let you my email on the chat, so it's going to be, of course, a pleasure to facilitate these connections. And sorry. Yeah. Yeah, as my collaborator told me that I sent my email just to Aurelio because I was in the internal chat. Thank you, Daniel. And Daniel and Emmanuel, sorry. Okay, now is the turn of Daniel. Nice to meet you, Daniel, but we are together from the early afternoon. And Daniel is from the Department of Social Work from the Hadassah Academic College in Israel. Sorry if my pronunciation is not correct, Daniel.
That's fine.
And together with some colleagues, Lucy Aichison, Zvi Bennings, and Bettina Steiner-Biermans, is going to present a talk entitled Lethal Encounters Between Police and People with Mental Disabilities in Israel. And again, I'll try to indicate you your 10 minutes, but feel free to take your time. If you want to share your screen, we are here.
Yes, I actually prepared a video. So, and the video is 7 minutes because that were the guidelines. So
perfect.
I hope it will work. But I would like to say that I'm very happy to be at this point in the session, because the issue of the government being the enemy is something that I'm very much involved with. This presentation is by a group of volunteers from the Public Committee Against Torture in Israel, and the torture is mainly done by the government, or not, or indirectly by the government, by the Secret Service, and so on. And among others, one of the measures of torture used is related to homosexuality or different sexual orientations. And both of those people who have a different orientation, and also like accusing people who are heterosexual and saying you're gay, and like terribly insulting them and things like that. But my presentation is not about that. My presentation is about something else, which you will see now. Let me share my screen.
Please.
Hello, my name is Daniel Weiswood, and I'll be talking about legal encounters between police and people with mental disabilities in Israel. A study performed by a group of volunteers for the Public Committee Against Torture in Israel. On this study worked Dr. Lucy Aitchison, Dr. Tzvi Beninga, and Dr. Bettina Steiner-Wirmans, together with me. Excessive police violence can happen anywhere. Review of the literature from many countries shows that people with mental disabilities, among others, are more likely to be subject to police violence than the general population. The present study examines examples of this worrying situation in Israel, suggests possible explanations resting on local socio-political aspects, police and civilian interactions, and their intersection with mental disabilities. It also provides recommendations for national authorities and for health professionals. We did a media search for fatal confrontations between Israeli police or security officers and people with mental disabilities. Years 2019-2020. We did not differentiate between police and other officers taking care of public order. We also searched only for violence against Israeli citizens in Israel, since the situation regarding violence against citizens of the Palestinian Authority is more complex and an issue by itself, as those Palestinian Arabs, rightfully or not, are anyway regarded in Israel as security threats. Searching the internet, we found 4 lethal and 1 severe but non-lethal encounter that reached the news. There may have been many other incidents that did not reach media attention, and we stick only to those incidents that got into the news, the mainstream news. We found that all victims were men between the age of 23 and 32. All belonged to socially disadvantaged groups in Israel. Let us now take a more detailed look at the specific cases. One of the 2 Arabs killed had autism and a cognitive disorder, whereas the other had epilepsy and a non-disclosed mental illness. The 3rd victim was a Jew of Eastern descent with schizophrenia and a substance disorder. The 4th victim was a Jew of Ethiopian origin with post-traumatic stress disorder. And the non-lethal incident involved ultra-Orthodox Jew with cognitive developmental delay. All 4 belong to groups that are to some extent considered marginal in Israeli society, that we refer to as second-class citizens. I'll share with you the tragedy of the incident of Yuda Biadka, one of the 4 people killed. Yuda was a 24-year-old Jew of Ethiopian background, his post-traumatic stress disorder, and was known to social services. In January 2019, his family called the police to protect him and others from harm as he was threatening and holding a knife. They reported that he had a mental disorder and was not taking his medication. Shortly after, police arrived at the scene. Yaska was shot twice and killed. His family went to court and against police, claiming that though he threatened, there are other ways to calm down someone who is mentally disturbed. In July 2022, the Israeli High Court rejected their opinion. This is just one of the examples. What we see here is an issue of intersectionality. Intersectionality refers to the notion that multiple social categories work together as compounding risk factors. In this case, the risk to be killed by a police or security officer. All cases we found involve intersectionality. All cases involve someone who belonged to a disadvantaged social group and suffered from a complex mental state as well. Following are the conclusions of this little study. Interactions between disabled individuals and police are more common and dangerous than for those who are able. Increases risk for these encounters to be lethal. We call on national institutes to be transparent in their reporting and investigate cases of police violence. We call health professionals to be aware of vulnerability of people with disabilities and document any incidents of police violence and medical violence. When we refer to documentation by health professionals, we relate to documentation by means of ICD, International Classification of Diseases. In fact, ICD-11 calls for better health with better information. So information is what we need. Both ICD-10 and ICD-11 have a code for legal intervention. This code reads as follows. Injuries inflicted by the police or other law enforcement agents, including military on duty, in the course of arresting or attempting to arrest lawbreakers, suppressing disturbances, maintaining order, or other legal action. So both ICD-10 and ICD-11 have codes, as you see at the bottom of this slide. And you can use these codes when documenting that a client had an encounter with a police officer, a soldier, or a security officer. This brings us to the end of this presentation on lethal encounters between police and people with mental disabilities in Israel. Unfortunately, we know that already since the end of this study, there were more cases of police violence as those we described. On behalf of Lucy Aitchison, Sri Beninga, and Bettina Steiner-Burmans, and myself, I would like to thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Daniel. Perfect time, actually. So we saved also some precious minutes for that. And, you know, just to start, maybe we could also continue the discussion of before, but, you know, for us, for European people, Israel, of course, it's a place at the border of our imagination, because I think, and I'm going to be really honest, for us it's a very advanced society from one side, or at least this is my belief, but in which coexist some paradox and of course sometimes a very difficult situation, I think. So can you tell us something more about how it's possible that you know, we consider Israel a part of Europe. That's definitely a common feeling here, and a place where the rights are present and the laws are in line with Europe. Maybe it's a mistake to consider Europe, you know, the place of the rights, the more advanced, you know, civil laws, society. But how it's possible to have these huge gaps in our societies, because also in Europe, as Aurelio clearly defined before, we have these paradoxes. And what about our methods as community psychologists to change these paradoxes?
Regarding methods, how to change things, I'm not sure that I'm the right person, but yes, Israel is to a large extent like a Western country, and when you compare it with the countries around in the Middle East, for sure it's the most democratic and it most respects human rights, but still, especially in recent years, it's becoming quite extremist, or it goes more to the right. It's not the only country where the politics go more to the right, not at all, but still, and it's surrounded by countries who are at least experienced as the enemy. So they're very frightened, and people want to be tough, and that's the feeling in the population. We need to be strong, and like the Arabs or the Palestinians like are against us, and they all want to kill us. So so that's the thinking behind like the finger on the gun.
Yeah. Actually, yeah, that's the topic. That's definitely the topic. But what about the role of religion in this shift toward the right party? You know, the impression here in Italy, because of course the media, sorry, is that there are some part of the society which is the Orthodox one, which is playing a role not just in promoting unfair laws or something, but in separate society in Israel. Is that right? This is the reality. Have they a role in this, or
yes, no? But we have like the Orthodox, like the religious Jewish Orthodox, and we have the ultra Orthodox, which are even like more those who walk around only in black and white. The problem is mostly with the Orthodox. There actually is now a leading Orthodox party who is just extremists that are fascist thinking, and they have a lot of supporters, and they every elections they get more.
Yeah, unfortunately in Italy it's the same. Was the same. I think it's going to be the same, but we are not talking about Italy. But the impression is that the nationalism, populism are growing everywhere, and
everywhere,
and with different recipes. You know, the scapegoating dynamics, it's always the solution for them. So to choose the weakest part of the society, and then to use them as a factor to unify this kind of issue, of instances in a society.
Exactly. Those are the evil people.
Yeah, those are the problems. Those are the reason why we should be stick together, and we should fight against them. So this
that's very strong in Israel.
Yeah, and that's why I repeat this concept. I repeated this concept in the last two symposium at least twice, but that's why I used to work with counter narratives methods, or I would like even more, because I think that this kind of approach or this kind of dynamics, let's say, could be partially at least mitigated by means of a rephrasing of this kind of narratives, putting people together with a common topic, with a common goal, to rephrase it. Also from different parties or from different perspectives, because I think that the oversimplification that usually institutions, the enemies, when the enemies is the state, can be not solved maybe, but unpolarized, just by means of the rephrasing from common people. Maybe the media, I'm honest, I have faith on new media. I have faith on internet, that of course it's a dangerous place, but at the same time, it's a place that could allow this kind of process. What do you think about it? Because, you know, Israel is a rich country, is a very advanced country, and, you know, Jewish people are the more bright, are between the more bright people around the world. So for us, it's scary. This is scary. You know, the best philosophy.
Wait, that may be a stereotype, but
yeah,
but you have published on radicalization on the internet.
Yeah.
On Facebook. So
yeah, that's of course. But I think that since, you know, there is the internalized homonegativity when we talk about gender issues and blah blah, we have also a positive prototype, internalized prototype, the one that Jewish thinkers are bright, are able to, no? I think that this sometimes this kind of maybe false myths, maybe not, could be used to promote.
I do think that dialogue groups are very good, but there is like not everyone agrees about the idea about dialogue groups. Some people say they make the problem even larger because every side sticks to its own talk, but also the idea of sharing life stories. Sharing life stories. It's from a different session, from a different virtual session that we heard about life stories. But I think that's very relevant also here when you want to bridge different people, which also may be true about the LGBT issues. When you hear about some other's story, about some other's life, then it's easier to accept.
Yeah, definitely I agree. Thank you very much, Daniel. I will. I would like to pass to the next two talks, but of course, it will be so interesting to continue this conversation. And the next talk would be a video, but I would like to have the last one before, from Luhan Svart, Gua Ismail, and Mohamed Sedat. I think that we have both Gua and Luhan. I think, is that right, Luhan? Are you there?
Yes, yes.
Nice
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I'm here.
If you want to share your screen,
yes.
I will present your contribution from the Institute for Social and Health Sciences from the University of South Africa. Luhan will present us a talk entitled "The Influence of Socio-Demographic Characteristic, Perceptions, and Experience of Violence and Neighborhood Attachment on Community Participation in a Low-Income Neighborhood in South Africa." You have more or less 10 minutes, Luhan, and when you're ready, you can start. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the introduction. And yes, I think that listening to all these other presentations, mine is going to be quite different, being quantitative. Found all the other presentations quite exciting, and thank you, Nancy Bartner, I hope I pronounced that correctly, that I think that you've given good background to my study in terms of what you said with, for South Africa. So just to start my presentation, so in the context of social transformation and safety promotion interventions, community participation may serve as one of the many mechanisms for improving health, social and economic outcomes for residents living in poor and marginalized communities. In this respect, the literature has emphasized the many benefits of community participation in that it offers residents of marginalized communities material and social resources, opportunities for skills and knowledge enhancement, as well as a space to exercise and strengthen personal and collective self-efficacy, as well as to contribute to the reduction in rates of violent crime and strengthen social capital. However, while the literature places the accent on the benefits of community participation, there's little consideration of the individual level factors that influence community participation, particularly in low and middle income contexts such as South Africa, where the level of poverty and the rates of violent crime are exceptionally high. So therefore, in order to address this gap and to broaden the scope of scholarship in this area, the current study focuses on the individual level factors associated with community participation. The specific objectives of the study were to identify the level of community participation among residents in a low-income country, in a low-income and under-resourced community in South Africa, and to determine whether social demographic characteristics, perceptions and experience of community violence and community attachment were associated with residents' participation in community organizations. Okay, just briefly before I go on to the study, just wanted to provide a brief overview of the conceptualization of community participation and research on the correlates of community participation. So there is no comprehensive and consistent definition of community participation. It is a value-laden phenomenon framed by the theoretical assumptions and worldviews and intentions. We follow Paulo Freire's thoughts that it is community participation is integral to the development process of transformation and involves both the personal and structural and is predicated on critical reflection and action. So community participation is also a multi-dimensional phenomena, and you can see this in the different definitions. I won't read out all the definitions, but just one of them, that community participation involves activities in the local community, politics or general society, with local country context, and it involves informal group or organizational membership, individual actions, voluntary actions, political action, and to bring about improvement to the local or societal or countrywide settings. So if you look at quantitative research, what the community participation as membership in a local community-based or neighborhood organizations is one of the most common measures of community participation. So for this study, we followed that, and community participation as membership in a community-based organization will be our outcome variable, and community participation in neighborhood organizations could involve religious, cultural, social, sport, school-based, and resident and self-help groups. We also thought that these type of groups provide members with opportunities for joint projects, mutual support, informal advice, and can contribute to strengthening inter-community relations. In terms of the research on the correlates of community participation, most of the research is conducted in high-income countries, and these emphasize that community participation or membership in neighborhood organizations is associated with socio-demographic factors, perceptions and experiences of crime and violence, and neighborhood attachment. So looking at the socio-demographic factors in terms of age, gender, marital status, employment status, and education, there have been different findings around this. For example, research will show that younger people are more likely than older people to participate in sports groups, school-related groups, political organizations, and trade unions, while older individuals are more likely than younger individuals to belong to church or volunteer groups. The research also shows differences between men and women, that men are more inclined to participate in civic activities, leadership, administrative roles, emergency services, and sports groups, while women are more likely to be involved in community service, school-related activities, and emotional care activities. Other studies also report a positive relationship between education and income and community participation, and just that socio-demographic factors in general are associated with the opportunities and the resources for community participation. In terms of neighborhood violence, perceptions of safety and fear of violent crime is shown to influence individual community participation. However, the results are contradictory, because some of the studies will show that these actually lead to individuals in the community to detach themselves from neighbors and therefore to withdraw from community participation. Whereas other studies will show that neighborhood crime and problems draw neighbors together, and they may actually motivate them to engage in community participation. The other group of variables that come up are neighborhood attachment, and that is measured through neighboring and sense of belonging. And neighboring refers to the socialization with neighbors and assistance that neighbors provide for each other. And and those are both been shown to be associated with community participation. So looking at these correlates, these will form our explanatory variables for our study as well. So getting on to our study, that the setting was an informal settlement within South Africa. And as you heard in the previous presentation, South Africa is marked by racialized and residentially based socioeconomic inequalities as a result of apartheid. Places such as townships, informal settlements are marked by extreme unemployment, poverty, limited access to infrastructure and services. And the country itself has very high levels of crime and violence, and much of this is concentrated in socioeconomic disadvantaged neighborhoods. The particular informal settlement that we conducted the study in is also built on dolomitic land. So government, due to the risk and the expense, has decided not to develop this land and to relocate the community. So some of the members of the community have been in favor of the relocation and some haven't. So this has also created some tension between the community members themselves. Okay, so we conducted a survey and we selected 300. The houses were randomly selected, 300 households. We asked to interview the senior female, and when the senior female was not available, we then asked to speak to the most senior male. We assumed that the senior female would have more details about the household. The inclusion criteria was to be over the age of 18, and they had to reside within the informal settlement. So, as I said, it was a structured questionnaire that was administered face-to-face. And for the analysis, we did a multiple linear regression to assess the association between socio-demographic characteristics, the experience of neighborhood violence and neighborhood attachment, and the outcome variable community participation. So this is the results for community participation. So residents were asked to indicate if they were involved in these various groups, and as you can see, that a large portion of the respondents, over half, were involved in religious groups. 64% were involved in religious groups. 25% were involved in stokvel or savings. Another 32% were involved in burial societies, and both the stokvel is a savings group, and the burial society is also a type of savings group. And in sports, 5.8% were involved in sports group, and we can see that community participation was high amongst this, the group of respondents. At least 78% of them were a member of one group. We can see that there were differences on all of these between males and females. Females were much more likely to be members of religious groups, savings, burial societies, while males were more likely to be a member of a sports group. These are the explanatory variables. So as we had a look, age, participants were between the ages of 18 and 79, with the average age being 39 years. The majority of the sample were female, 56%, 54% were married, 52% were employed, and in terms of education, the mean of 3.7 means that on average, some had obtained a high school education. In terms of neighborhood violence, we asked them about their perceptions of the level of neighborhood violence, whether they thought it had increased, remained the same, or decreased over the past 3 years. That score shows that on average, most thought that violence had increased in the neighborhood. And in terms of fear of violent victimization, we asked respondents whether fear of crime had ever prevented them from participating in certain daily activities. So there were 9 items there, and these included using public transport, walking to the shops, allowing children to walk to school, or investing in a home business. So the score there of 2.27 indicates that on average, fear of crime prevented respondent participation on average in approximately 2 routine activities. Okay, the victim of neighborhood violence, respondents were asked a set of 10 questions. They were asked in the past 6 months, have they ever experienced being threatened with a knife or sharp weapon? Have they been attacked with a knife or sharp weapon? These are just examples. Were they robbed in the community during the past 6 months? And you see there we have a mean score of 0.048. So a minority of the respondents had been involved or experienced neighborhood violence. It was approximately 14% of the respondents had experienced some form of violence. Neighborhood attachment, that was measured on a scale, and the score of 3.39 is actually quite a high score, indicating that many of the respondents visited their neighbors' homes quite frequently. And the same with sense of belonging. This is also a high score. Examples of the items used here were like, I feel like I belong to the neighborhood. I feel loyal to the people in my neighborhood. And these scores, as I say, were generally very high.
Thank you, Anna. Unfortunately, we are finishing our time. I'm really sorry to should interrupt you. We will have a very brief video now from the last speaker, and then unfortunately in 4 minutes the next session will start. I don't know if you want just 1 minute to conclude with your conclusion.
Okay, so just that the factors that were associated with community participation were being female, being employed, and fear of violent victimization. So those were the factors that predicted community participation. And we could speak to these to understand it. You need to understand the historical and contemporary political and economic conditions of that influence community participation. And it is a complex association between these variables, and that we suggest that further research use mixed method and transdisciplinary research approaches.
Thank you very much. And actually, I agree. Actually, we published a lot of papers about participation and violence. And I think that, but of course, you know more than me about this, how much culture can play a role. Because in Italy, this link between community participation and fear of violence is frequently not significant. But I think that it actually is. There's a significant relationship, but maybe mediated by or moderated by other factors. So it would be a really interesting topic. So I'm really sorry. It's my fault to have probably enlarged some discussion before. Now I would like to present the last contribution. It's a 7-minute video, and then we will shift to the last symposium of today. Thank you again, Luana, and sorry for interrupting you, but I think that the concept and the results were really clear. And so now let me share the screen. No. Okay, yes, this one. And please enjoy with us this last contribution.
Hi all, thank you for tuning in to our Immigrant Status and System Perceptions virtual presentation. My name is Nancy Bartecki, and I will be discussing this research with you today. This research was also conducted by Kaylin Vasquez and Dr. Christy Reyna here at DePaul University. So today we wanted to look at immigrants, their optimism in coming to the US, why they're optimistic, and how they justify the American system, kind of what happens maybe later on as they are not newly arrived immigrants anymore. The longer they stay, to kind of see what happens. And Joseph Banji in 1994 kind of paved the way with this research with something called system justification theory. And this theory posits that people are motivated to support the status quo because they see it as good and desirable. Their perception of the system helps them and motivates them to justify that same system. So, newly arrived immigrants coming to the US, they may be coming over because they are in countries that they believe are more unstable than the United States. Again, this is relative and objective to their thinking of their country. And they come to benefit from the promise of the American dream that America, likes to put forth for the whole world to see. And so we wanted to see how they are justifying and how they are viewing, how they are perceiving the different American systems: political, healthcare, economical, and justice. And this study is actually trying to replicate a previous study done by Reyna and Zimmerman in 2017 to find immigration effect, where newly arrived immigrants are justifying the American system more than native-born immigrants. We wanted to replicate the study in 2022 to see if we were going to get the same kinds of data and the same results, and kind of see where it goes from there. So we're predicting that those not born in the US will be more likely to justify the system, but they will also be less likely to condemn the system. But the longer that an immigrant has been in the US, the less likely that they will justify and the more that they will condemn. So we're kind of looking at like a scale here. They arrive, they're justifying and justifying, not condemning. The longer they stay, they're going to justify less and they're going to condemn the system more. And we're going to talk about this later, but this could be for various reasons. They've seen the system, they've been involved in the system, they kind of see how it works, how it could be different from their American dream perception. So This data was collected in 2020 during the height of COVID-19 and the BLM racial protests. So at a time where America was really going through it, quote unquote, with lots of various things happening in all of these systems. So we have 3 measures that we're going to talk about today, 2 of which should be fairly recognizable. The third might be a new one to you. So we have system justification. System justification says, you know, the political system operates as it should. It's doing its job. It does what it needs to do. We have system condemnation, where people will be saying, you know, the healthcare system has failed the American people. They are condemning the system. And then we have this new measure called system qualification. So system qualification is when people recognize that the system works for some groups over others. So this could be a question like, the economic system in America benefits certain groups over other groups. So having that recognition that it works for some but not for all. We used a mixed model, Manitoba, and control for race, income, and education. And after we ran the study, we found that the immigration effect actually did not replicate. However, across all groups, across native-born and foreign-born, people were both condemning and qualifying the system regardless of immigration status, which was interesting to see, and we can talk about that in a bit. So Rainey and Zimmerman, they did find this immigration effect, and our study did not replicate this findings. Our data showed that native-born and foreign-born Americans are both not justifying the system. Both groups are qualifying and condemning the system more than they are just justifying, and you can see that in a little graph here. This midpoint here of 4, justification, qualification, condemnation. We're seeing a lot less of justification for both groups. Both groups qualifying and both groups condemning very similarly. You can see how very close they are with each other. There are a few implications for this. So when Rainey and Zimmerman did their study in 2017, it was during the Obama era. There was a lot of hopefulness and optimism about a Black immigrant president being the first to be president. And so there's a lot of optimism and hope, especially from other countries who are seeing this first time presidency. So they could have been really, really hopeful about this system compared to previous presidencies or newer presidencies. Also, in 2020, when this data was collected, it was during COVID-19 and the racial justice protests. And these things could have exposed those various broken systems, you know, economical, healthcare, political, criminal justice. They could have exposed them as these dysfunctional systems that failed to provide adequate services in desperate times of need for the American system, for the American people, I'm sorry, excuse me, or they're just super steeped in systemic racism that disadvantage lower status groups, aka system qualification, and people are now recognizing that. So those are some implications for why our data did not replicate. And this could also, even though our data did not replicate the way that we wanted it to, this can kind of show a broader discussion about how systems benefit certain groups more than other groups during times of need, during unrest, during, you know, a pandemic. So although it did not replicate, we have a lot to discuss and talk about as to, you know, it didn't replicate, but that's actually more interesting that it didn't replicate, because it kind of shows how the different time period changes the immigrant understanding and how, you know, as things are being more exposed to the news media, you know, issues of the pandemic, issue of racial justice protests, and now people are becoming more aware of how the system works, you know, through education, through resources. People are seeing that the system is not benefiting them the way that it should. So this research is really interesting, and we're going to continue this research and kind of see how maybe over time, at what point in an immigrant's journey in America do they start to change? You know, how many years does it take? You know, we only had a small sample size of 260 foreign-born US Americans. So in the future, we'd like to increase the sample size and try again. You know, like I said, comparing the immigrant groups based on their time within the US, and even looking at specific racial and ethnic backgrounds of different immigrant groups, right? Because just because you immigrate does not mean you have the same experience, depending on what country you're coming from and what is happening in the country. So really, really cool data. I'm really excited to continue this data and then, you know, hopefully publish a paper and really showcase what is happening. It is really important to understand how system perceptions affect immigrants and how their status affects system perception. It goes both ways. So yeah, really excited to continue this data and excited to share it with you all. Thank you for listening.
Okay. Actually, we are a little, we got a little late for this, little delay for this session. Thank you again to everybody. And we are going to open the next session. I see George here, but we are going to open the next and last symposium for today. Thank you everybody for being here, and hopefully we will have the opportunity to interact each other again. Have a nice night, day, or morning, depending of your time. Bye bye.
Grazie mille Andrea, thank you everyone.
Ciao Aurelio, piacere.